So I'll share my screen now and I'll mute everyone before just starting. A very good evening to all and thank you so much for joining this webinar today. My name is Komal Kanodia, working as a brand manager with IVA, a division of MCure. MCure is pioneered in the field of gynecology and so in IVF. So we have today with us Dr. Amit Borse, who is heading the marketing team of IVA, and Nikhil Mehra, who is the sales head. So Dr. Amit, would you like to say a few words before we start with the session?
Thank you so much, Komal. I'll not take a lot of time. We have a guest of honor with us. We have all other dignitaries and faculty. We are thankful to IFS UP, Rajasthan and Haryana chapter to take us this very important topic, living with PCOS. And we are truly delighted to host this event. There will be a call away. If anybody feels any academic activities are to be done, we'll be there. Komal, all over to you.
Thank you so much, Amit sir. So I would like to say a big thanks to Dr. Sunita Chandra, IFS UP, Rajasthan, Haryana chapter, Dr. Sonu, Dr. Anju Mathur for giving us this opportunity of hosting this webinar. We have conducted 500 plus webinar as of now, and we have Materna as a quality brand. It's an epitome of quality and success. So thank you so much, Dr. Sunita. Now I would like to hand over the session to you. So just few words from your side. Unmute yourself, doctor.
Dr. Sudhaki, please CV laga dena. So, friends, today we are going to start a very, very important subject, living with PCOS. And I mean, all of us will agree about it that it's still an unsolved puzzle. All the time, every time we see these young girls, this reproductive age group, there's ladies after deliveries, and then long-term complications. We keep on seeing it, and still we are in dilemma how to treat it. So we thought that let us start a webinar, a series of webinar on this very important subject, which we are seeing in our day-to-day practice. And thank you, Dr. Sudha Prasad, Madam, our President, Indian Fertility Society, Dr. Neena Malhotra, our Secretary General, a very dynamic Secretary of Indian Fertility Society, for giving us this opportunity. So UP chapter IFS, Rajasthan chapter IFS, and Haryana chapter IFS has come with this idea of having series of webinars on living with PCOS. I welcome our guest of honor, our President, Indian Fertility Society, Dr. Sudha Prasad, on this first session for directly from OT to give us her blessings. I welcome Dr. Anju Mathur, Secretary, Rajasthan chapter, Dr. Sonu Balhara, Secretary, Haryana chapter, my colleague, Dr. Manjusha, she is as quiz master, Dr. Sarika, she is master of ceremony, Dr. Surbeen, she is first speaker, Dr. Smriti Agrawal, she is another speaker, Dr. Usha Shekhawat, Dr. Neela Beheti, Dr. Suman Mittal, and Dr. Pita Pandey as our chairpersons, and Dr. Ritu and overall as expert of the session. We will be hearing her expert comments. So now I request Dr. Sudha Prasad Madam, who is Director of Matrat IVF and Advanced Training Center. She is President IFS 22 tak, and she was our Vice President Foxy. All of us know that, and she has a vast experience of teaching. That is almost 34 years. All of us know she is a teacher par excellence. And she was President AOGD from 16 to 17. Without taking much time, ma'am, please, over to you. Please give us blessings on this very important subject.
She has dropped off, I believe. Dr. Sudha is not here, Dr. Sunita. She has dropped off, I believe.
No, she has joined again. She has joined again.
She has joined. Yes.
Yes.
She
Sorry, I was lost in between. So good
Yes.
evening to all of you. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm so sorry I'm speaking from OT, but I really give credit to 3 IFS chapters who have really made this topic, which is a burning topic of living with PCOS. Every age group comes with the PCOS with so many problems, and we are really thankful that Sunita, Anju, and Sonu, all these 3 active persons of our IFS has really taken this topic to make everybody educated. I hope this webinar will make you understand what is the basic problem. There is a basic genetic problem also in the PCOS. So one should try to see it that yes, how to deal with it. And main theme should be the counseling, because these patients are very much depressed and frustrated. So I hope at the end of this session, everybody will take a very good bonanza of theme, and they will really take the key messages how to treat this PCOS. You are seeing it. I just want to say to all listeners that Indian Fertility Society has made the academic platform, and they really want to teach each and every topic, and they want to give you tips when you are managing these kind of patients. So please take the good tips and be the member, so you will be able to get all these academic feast every time, because whole year we are having, every week, every day rather, I must tell you, we are having these kind of academic feast, and we will give you the tips about it. Thank you so much, and congratulations to all the 3 chapters for the Indian Fertility Society for making this successful. And I hope this MCure will also keep on helping us whole year. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, ma'am. Thank you so
definitely,
much.
doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Sudha ma'am. Thank you so much for joining from OT. Thank you, and I'm really sorry for troubling you. But
Not at all.
to have your blessings at least on our first lecture, first session. Thank you,
Yes.
ma'am. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Invite Dr. Anju. I can't see Dr. Anju. Dr. Anju, are you there? Dr. Anju.
No, she is not here, I believe.
Okay.
I'll
Dr.
just.
Sonu, I can see.
She's here in the attendee. I'll promote her.
Okay, so till then, Dr. Sonu, she is Secretary Haryana chapter. She's a good friend. Dr. Sonu, you want to say something, please say, and then I hand over the mic to Dr. Sarika.
Yeah, Dr. Sunita, thank you so much. It is all your thoughts and your ideas to start this initiative. And indeed, everyone, like Sudha ma'am said, everyone will benefit from all the lectures and everything. And just all the best to all of us. And thank you for including us with your ideas and to promote this educative series.
Dr. Anju को कोमल तुमने ऐड किया?
Yes. Now she can unmute herself.
Dr. Anju, please unmute करो.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
she's
Sunita.
Secretary Rajasthan chapter. She's a very good friend of mine and very beautiful person from heart also, not only outside. She's a very good person, and she'll say a few words about this series of webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Sunita, for making my dream come true. PCOD has been an enigma, as Dr. Sudha was just saying. And we, as the gynecologists, have been fighting it. I remember the days, when we were studying, then PCOD was just a footnote. Just a footnote saying the ovaries are like this, and these things happen, and we hardly knew anything as a graduate and a postgraduate. But today we have master classes on PCOD, so you can imagine what has changed and how it has become so very important. As the problem has increased, also we are in dilemma what to do to a PCO who is just 12 years old. Should we start with oral contraceptives? Should we start with progesterone? Should we just continue theek ho jayega, kamzori hai as the things goes? So to put light on all these and to teach our junior gynecologists, our students, our fellows who are now coming and who will take the baton forward from here, should know what are the guidelines and how we should do and what we are facing they should not face, and should the treatment be started early. With this in mind, we had thought of it, and Dr. Sunita has put the things in the form. And I hope we continue with our 8 classes in a good way, and students are benefited, and we could convey the academic points that we want to tell the junior gynecologist. With this, over to Dr. Sarika, who can continue.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your kind words. And at the onset, first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Sunita for giving me this opportunity to conduct this wonderful initiative of the master classes. Thank you so much, ma'am. And without taking much time, just a footnote, like PCO is becoming so prevalent. It is like a pandemic. It has more or less taking a shape of a pandemic, especially in adolescents. On a recent, I was just searching. It was I found that every one in five females in India, they are having PCO. So the problem is massive, and especially the adolescent, as rightly said by my seniors, adolescent PCO has become a very challenging situation for us to treat, to counsel them, and to cure them. Just a small few words, a little poem which I liked, which I found. I want to share it with you. From a willowy body to a plump, from a cheerful extrovert to a stressed out, depressed introvert, from a beautiful scarless face to a hairy, ugly one. She lost her smile. She lost her confidence. She lost herself. What happened to her? Everybody wondered, while the cysts on her ovaries had a wicked laugh. So this is the scenario, like the poor child, she is perplexed what to do. Her mother is perplexed. So this is a wonderful idea of these master classes on PCOS. And without wasting much time, I want to invite our chairpersons for the first session, Dr. Usha and Dr. Neela. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. Usha Shekhawat, she is a professor in HOD Department of Obs and Gynae, MGH Jaipur. She's an ex-professor, HOD Department of Reproductive Medicine.
I think, thank you very much for the introduction, but I think we can skip this formality.
Okay, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am.
And just put up the slide.
Welcome to our session.
She has been our teacher. She's a wonderful lady that I will add on, and she's a very good academic.
Surely.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
And our next chairperson is Dr. Neela. Dr. Neela, she is an IVF specialist practicing in Jaipur. She is a program director, IVF unit, reproductive healthcare Jaipur. Her main interests are in reproductive medicine, care of high-risk pregnancy, and preventive gynecological oncology. A very warm welcome to you, ma'am. And now I'll hand over the session to Dr. Usha to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Surveen.
Can I have a slide, please? Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for the IFS for inviting me to this important, masterclass series. Because yes, definitely, as we all know, PCOS is becoming a pandemic almost. And secondly, especially it's involving the youngsters who are so worried about their looks and who are so health conscious otherwise. But when it comes to their problems concerned with PCOS, and after the net searching that they do, they are so frightened with it. They are so scared that what is going to happen to our ovaries, because it is on the net, they will tell you right up to the end that you're prone to have cancers and you're prone to have infertility and so on and so forth. So they are so scared. And that is the main purpose, that even the younger group of our faculty members, they should be knowing it through and through so that they can counsel their patients, and so it can be properly, they can be elevated from their anxiety. So for this first speaker to speak upon the obesity and hypomenorrhea, if is it related to PCOS, I would like to call upon Professor Surveen Goman Sindhu, and she is director and head of the IVF and Reproductive Medicine Center, Max Multi-Specialty Hospital.
Dr. Usha, unmute. Yeah.
I'm unmuted. Can't you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hello,
Now we can
I
hear
be
you.
Here, ma'am.
We can hear you.
So she has authored many books, about 8 books, 4 of which have been published internationally. And she has many publications, almost 80 publications in journals and books. She's program director for the fellowship in the reproductive medicine at Max Hospital. She's assistant editor, Fertility Science and Research Journal. And she's peer reviewer for the journal System Biology in the Reproductive Medicine, Journal of Obstetrics and of India, and Journal of Indian Medical Association. She has held many positions in the academic societies, like she has been treasurer, past editor of the Indian Fertility Society, chairperson of Infertility Committee of AOGD, and chairperson Reproductive Endocrinology Committee of the AOGD 21-23, past editor of the Association of Obstetrics and Gynecology of Delhi, and past co-author editor in the NARCHI, Delhi 2006 to 2008. She has numerous awards to her credit, and like the Foxy North Zone Yuva Award, Distinguished Services Award by IMA, and then ET Award 2019 for Best IVF Specialist, National Award, and Satya Paul IOG Award for the Best Review Articles, and IMT Summit Icon Year IVF awarded on the 1st of February 2019. So these are the credit points that she has, and I would invite her to speak on the topic. Dr. Surveen, please.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, ma'am,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Very loud and clear. Very good.
At the outset, thank you, Sunita, Anju, Sonu. Thank you so much for having me over. And it's a pleasure being here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, doctor, we
ma'am.
can see you and screen as well. Just to motivate you all, we have crossed 100 participants in the starting of the session. So looking forward to a great session.
So, I think, Sunita, you gave me a very interesting topic. It is not the run of the mill for the usual PCO topic. And you actually helped me to learn better. Thank you. So does obesity and hypomenorrhea in a young girl always mean PCOS? Let's have a look and see what all we've been managed to collect. So we all know the definition of PCOS. It is a heterogeneous collection of signs and symptoms and a spectrum from mild to severe, and it disrupts the reproductive, endocrinal, and metabolic functions of the woman, being the most common endocrinal disorder in women of reproductive age, with a prevalence of 6 to 10%, some say even 15 to 20. We also know the Rotterdam's criteria. I'm not going into detail because my topic is something entirely different. Irregular, infrequent periods or no periods, any biochemical or clinical evidence of hypoandrogenism, and an ultrasound scan showing a polycystic disease. Now, a little bit about the phenotypes, because we need to know. There are 4 phenotypes which are there in PCOS. And when we talk about the severe PCOS, that is going to have anovulation, hypoandrogenism, as well as PCO in the TVS. And it is one of the most common ones, 48%. Anovulatory plus hypoandrogenemia is 30%. Ovulatory, where there is no anovulation, but there's hyperandrogenemia, and PCOS in ultrasound is again 9.7%, and mild, which has anovulation and PCO, is 11%. So these are the basic phenotypes which we see when we. Now we all know that this diagnostic criteria in adolescence is like actually very difficult to follow because there are many issues. Firstly, many adolescents would have mild hirsutism during the pubertal stage. So we have to consider only a moderate to severe hirsute as a PCO. There may be acne normally present in adolescent. So acne again cannot be a clinical evidence of hyperandrogenism. What about biochemical? It has to be persistent elevation of a free or a total testosterone. It should not be just one value of testosterone. And that is what we usually find on our prescription. One testosterone is done and she is labeled. And a single androgen greater than 2 standard deviations above the mean for a specific assay should not be considered. What about oligoanovulation? It should be more than 45 days in individuals who are 2 or more years away from menarche. If they are within 2 years of menarche, you cannot even take more than 45 days. The second is 90 days of amenorrhea, even in the first year of menarche, should raise your antennas that she is a PCO. And lack of onset of menses by 15 years or more than 2 years after thelarche again needs investigation. What about ovarian volume? Now in adolescence again, we take it greater than 12. Follicles should not be used to define a PCO morphology in adolescence because you do find a multifollicular pattern in adolescence as normal. In healthy girls with a regular menses and no evidence of hyperandrogenemia, polycystic morphology does not indicate a PCO. Again, doing these ultrasounds is very difficult. They may be obese and we have to do a transabdominal. Hence, it's actually not going to yield us much information. What about insulin resistance? It should not be used again to diagnose PCO in an adolescent, or it's not even there in the diagnosis of an adult PCO. So my lecture is further divided into 2 parts: oligomenorrhea and PCOS in relation to young girls, and obesity and PCOS. So let's have a look. Let's have a look at the causes of oligomenorrhea in a young girl. It could be hypothalamic pituitary axis disorders, and very commonly anorexia nervosa. They're trying to lose weight, doing a lot of exercise. There may be some chronic illness which may be making them lose weight. There may be a delayed maturation, a central nervous system tumor, or a pseudocysis. In the ovarian disorders, there could be an ovarian insufficiency. She could have undergone a chemotherapy or a pelvic irradiation, which could have led to an ovarian failure. There could be a genetic syndrome like Turner's, which could be making her oligomenoric and then finally amenorrheic and then a premature failure. There could be hormone secreting tumors, and there could be polycystic ovarian syndrome. There could be hyperprolactinemia, lactation, drugs, pituitary adenoma, hypothyroidism, hypoandrogenism, adrenal diseases, and miscellaneous conditions. Don't forget the pregnancy, hormonal contraception, and hypothyroidism. That is very, very important. But out of all these, it is seen that oligomenorrhea, the most common cause, is a PCO in an adolescent. So coming on to the symptoms of I'm talking about a patient of oligomenorrhea, and how would we say this is PCO or this is a non-PCO cause? Let's look at the menstrual pattern. Oligomenorrhea beginning shortly after menarche and continuing unabated suggests a PCO. Recent onset of oligomenorrhea after an interval of normal menstrual function suggests maybe a pregnancy, medication side effects, calorie deprivation, or a thyroid disease, a secondary onset disease. Weight and physical activity. Weight loss, especially in combination with a desire to lose more weight or an obsession for food behavior, points to anorexia nervosa. Intense physical exercise is again caloric deprivation and anorexia nervosa. Weight gain or obesity is going to point to a PCOS or a hypothyroidism. So that's how you would categorize patients who are oligomenoric. Not all of them are going to be PCO. Those who are very thin, calorie deficient, may be actually anorexia. Medications. Now, inquiry should focus on these medications: hormonal contraceptives, anti-neoplastic therapies, medications causing hyperprolactinemia. This is a list of drugs. I'm not going to go through it. We all know that these are the drugs which cause hyperprolactinemia. What about the endocrine symptoms pointing to an endocrine disease? The symptoms pointing to an endocrine disease other than a PCOS. Hot flushes, autoimmune endocrine disease, history of autoimmune endocrine disease would suggest a premature ovarian insufficiency. A history of galactoria strongly suggests hyperprolactinemia. Hirsutism, severe acne would be a PCOS or an adrenal disease. Changes in weight can point to a thyroid disease. And GI symptoms could actually point to an early pregnancy. That is one diagnosis we must never forget when she comes to us with 2 months amenorrhea or that she's getting delayed periods. Signs. Now let's have a look at the body weight. If the body weight is less than 85% of the expected of that age and a BMI lower than 5th percentile, then it is an anorexia nervosa or a calorie deprivation. Short stature would raise questions for chromosomally mediated gonadal dysgenesis. Overweight, again, we could put her in PCOS or thyroid disorders. In an oligomenoric woman, does being overweight diagnose PCOS? This is our question, our main topic. Being overweight is very prevalent in adolescents, and you know that puppy fat is going to be there. So every adolescent who is obese cannot be labeled as PCOS. And also because many adolescents with PCOS are not obese. So obesity per se has no diagnostic value for PCOS. So it's not even included in the diagnostic criteria of PCOS. What about other signs besides obesity? Hirsutism suggests either an ovarian or an adrenal source. Moderate to severe acne is very common in normal adolescents, but can suggest hypoandrogenism. But acanthosis nigricans does raise the question that she may be polycystic ovarian. Thyroid gland. The enlargement of a thyroid gland can suggest pregnancy, hypothyroidism, or less commonly, hyperthyroidism. What about galactoria? It could be symptomatic, it could be asymptomatic galactoria where she doesn't even know, or no galactoria. If galactoria is found, it can be due to pregnancy, medication, hypothyroidism, or prolactinoma. So, in order to diagnose which of these is it, we do laboratory tests. And in galactoria, we measure prolactin. If it is mildly elevated, it's usually medication. If it is very high, then it is probably a pituitary adenoma. If it is normal, then evaluation for alternative causes of oligomenorrhea with galactoria should be pursued, like hypothyroidism specifically should be excluded because rarely hypothalamic thyroid releasing hormone acts as prolactin releasing hormone, resulting in galactoria and oligomenorrhea. Now, thyroid stimulating hormones should be measured to identify patients with thyroid disorder, either as the cause of oligomenorrhea or as a concomitant condition. And FSH measurement is very important because that suggests whether she's in premature ovarian failure. If it is raised, then we know that she is working towards premature ovarian failure. In fact, in these patients, even an FSH of 9.5, 10 should raise your antennas a little bit on what is happening. In patients with no identified low, now if we find that everything is normal, there's nothing wrong, then our diagnosis should point towards an inadequate calorie intake or negative energy balance or chronic disease, disordered eating, intense exercise. This could be the most likely explanation of oligomenorrhea. However, imaging is very important, not only for identification of PCOS, but also for identification of ovarian and adrenal tumors, especially in patients with rapid progressive virilization or an abdominal or pelvic mass. That is one of the tests which has to be done. What about the role of oral progestin? She has not got her periods, let's say about 3 months, and then we generally write a MEP rate or we say that, okay, Primalo 10 lelo. Do we do it in adolescents? Let's see what is the significance. Oral progestin challenge is sometimes recommended as an in vivo test of ovarian and endometrial function, and we all do it. Now, this test can produce a false positive. Although the presence of bleeding after oral progestin challenge is thought to demonstrate normal ovarian function, nearly 50% of women who have premature ovarian insufficiency will also show a withdrawal bleeding. And usually adolescents with premature ovarian insufficiency do show a withdrawal bleeding because they haven't gone into total insufficiency. Nearly all non-pregnant adolescents with oligomenorrhea have some ovarian estrogen present. and will have withdrawal bleeding, establishing a specific diagnosis which will necessitate laboratory testing. So the withdrawal bleeding is not going to tell you what exactly is the diagnosis, because all these patients have estrogen. So what is the recommendation? That adolescents with oligomenorrhea interposing a progestin challenge test merely postpones the laboratory evaluation and must be undertaken in order to establish a diagnosis and to select appropriate treatment. So our first thing should not be a withdrawal bleeding. We may give a withdrawal bleeding, but along with that, we have to write all the laboratory tests, because even if she does have that bleeding, we need to diagnose why she was oligomenorrhea. Now, what is the significance of hypoandrogenemia in this kind of a scenario? Many young girls with raised testosterone, DHEA, are there in their adolescent period, and they show no clinical signs, except they may have oligomenorrhea, and often within 3 years this becomes okay. A mildly elevated level of total of free testosterone or DHEAS fulfills one criteria of diagnosis of PCOS. We all know that. But we must also understand that many patients with PCOS have a normal total testosterone, but an elevated free testosterone. This is one thing which we must understand, because there is a sex hormone binding globulin is decreased. So their free testosterone starts to increase in PCOS. So how much is too much? Like how much testosterone will you say, okay, this is PCOS, and beyond this is a adrenal tumor because it's too high? A total testosterone level greater than 150 or a DHEAS level greater than 700 suggests an adrenal tumor. So that is where if you see an oligomenorrheic woman and you do a testosterone, she may not be PCOS even if it is raised, and it is very raised. Then you have to look towards an adrenal tumor. So what other androgen can be tested? Then you will do a 17-hydroxyprogesterone in the morning between 7 and 9 during the follicular phase. The initial screening test is this for non-classical congenital adrenal hyperplasia. A normal level is going to exclude this diagnosis. But if it is an elevated baseline level, then adrenocorticotropin hormone provocative tests are to be done. And here you would also go and consult an endocrinologist, because that becomes more of their purview. Now, in cases where no diagnosis can be made either by symptoms or by lab tests, what are you going to do? With no diagnostic clues, an oligomenorrheic adolescent who is fewer than 2 years past menarche, is not sexually active, and has no symptoms or signs to suggest a specific cause of oligomenorrhea, may simply have delayed maturation. So you need to just postpone the investigations for further few months and don't hassle her. What is the prognosis of these girls? Now, you know, the mothers generally ask, okay, she's oligomenorrheic, and you're saying that maybe after 2 years she'll become okay. But do all girls become okay? So no, all girls don't become okay. It is a guarded prognosis which you have to give the mother. In a prospective study, this was in 2004, they found that adolescents, the menstrual pattern of 51% of these oligomenorrheic girls remained oligomenorrheic 3 years after follow-up, versus 2% of age-matched adolescents who had normal menstrual cycles. So the prognosis is not totally normal. It's a 51% versus a 2% which we are looking at. So let's just go over our evaluation and how we are going to do it. So we take the patient's history and examination. Always rule out a pregnancy. Once you have ruled out the pregnancy and there is no gland involvement suggested, look at the time from menarche. If the time from menarche is less than 2 years, then it is delayed maturation, please wait. But if the time is more than 2 years, then you need to see that there is no gland involvement suggested. We go ahead and do these tests: the thyroid gland, prolactin, screen for ovarian disease, FSH, testosterone, and the adrenal gland. If there is a gland involvement suggested, that means that there is gland specific. She may have galactorrhea or signs and symptoms of a thyroid disease or premature ovarian failure with hot flushes, or ultrasounding is showing a PCOS, or there is some symptom which shows caloric deprivation. Then you need to test accordingly to the gland and pick up those tests. Obesity, the second part of our lecture. let's first start with the fallacy of BMI measurement in adolescents. The standard BMI weight status categories used for adult are not dependent on age and sex, and therefore cannot be used in interpretation of BMI in adolescents, because the BMI in adolescents is very sex dependent also. Boys will have a different one, girls are going to have a different one. Hence, you should be looking at charts where the BMI is interpreted as BMI for age and BMI for sex percentile, and these charts are available. Because BMI does not directly measure adiposity, it is not accurate in predicting health risks for athletic adolescents who have a huge muscle mass, so they will be heavy, or a sedentary adolescent who has a reduced muscle mass. So there are various weight categories for these patients. Greater than or equal to 85 percentile or less than 95 percentile is overweight. Class 1 is equal to or greater than 95 percentile to less than 120 percentile. Class 2 is 120 to 140 of 95th percentile or a BMI of more than 35, and class 3 is more than 140 or equal to 40 BMI. These are the categories which have been suggested. What is the prevalence of obesity and what are the trends? So there are some studies which have shown that PCOS women, 80% are obese. In general, obesity in young adolescent females in the United States increased from 10 to 21%, and it continues to increase beyond 2014 also. We are finding a higher level of obesity amongst this age group. And the intrauterine environment now has come up to play a large role in childhood and adolescent obesity. Prevalence of obesity by race, with Black adolescents having the highest prevalence, Hispanics, whites, and Asians the lowest. 8% of female adolescents have extreme obesity, of over 120% of the sex-specific 95. This is all ACOG data. What contributes to obesity in PCOS? It is seen that when comparable diagnostic criteria are applied both to the prevalence and severity of obesity, they are found to be lower in women with PCOS outside the United States. So it is not that there is a generalized prevalence and severity. And hence they have suggested that environmental factors and lifestyle factors may be very important in developing obesity in PCOS. So there is a biological basis for this observation, and obesity, the importance of obesity with PCOS is that it exacerbates many of the reproductive and metabolic abnormalities. So until recently, PCOS has been recognized as a hyperandrogenic disorder originating from the hypothalamic pituitary gonadotropin secretion or an ovarian dysfunction. We used to always enlist it as an ovarian dysfunction. However, lately things have changed, and at some cases of PCOS have been regarded as a disorder of metabolic origin that impairs reproductive function. So it's vice versa which is occurring. Obesity, and what has led to this is obesity, particularly in the abdominal region, is found in more than 50% of women with PCOS. So there is a metabolic origin here. And furthermore, clinical phenotypes and development of PCOS are thought to be reinforced by obesity. These observations are associated and they highlight the importance of disentangling the relationship between obesity and PCOS, and particularly the common metabolic disorders. Who is responsible for what? So this is the entanglement of metabolic abnormality, obesity, and PCOS. And we need to see what all else is associated. So with metabolic abnormalities and obesity, we have insulin resistance, and this seems instrumental in the co-development of PCOS and type 2 diabetes mellitus in obese adolescent girls. Hence, it affects the metabolic abnormalities and it is there for a PCOS patient. What about visceral fat? Now, visceral fat also plays an independent role and is thought to exacerbate these hormone alterations in adolescent girls, affecting the PCOS status and the metabolic abnormality. What about hyperandrogenemia? It exacerbates the physiological changes of androgens during puberty and may be the initiation of the precocious puberty. So the hypoandrogenism may cause precocious puberty, which is seen in girls, which in turn is a risk factor for PCOS. So anybody with a precocious puberty is prone to PCOS. Given this complexity, many investigations have sought to determine how these factors are linked together and what roles they play in the development of obesity and PCOS. What about obesity with insulin resistance? Now, insulin resistance, this defect is independent of but substantially worsened by obesity. So, even if the patient is non-obese, she can be insulin resistant. But if she is obese and insulin resistant, the result is much worse. Furthermore, the risk of developing glucose intolerance is markedly increased in an obese PCOS by 1.5 versus 10. So 10 times more if there is a obese PCOS. Moreover, if the persistence and progress of glucose intolerance, that means when you repeat the glucose tolerance test after 2.5 years, and there is an accelerated conversion from to type 2 diabetes, it is strongly dependent upon the BMI of the woman. So even the progress of insulin resistance to a type 2 diabetes is dependent on insulin resistance. So this part was summarized by PCOS is associated with high rates of glucose intolerance resulting from defects of insulin action. Obesity substantially exacerbates these effects so that the obese reproductive age women with PCOS are at very high rates of glucose intolerance. And always remember that fasting glucose may often be normal in these girls, and you need to do a glucose tolerance test to actually diagnose them. So what comes first, the egg or the chicken? So is it obesity which causes PCOS? Is it PCOS which causes obesity? So let's try and understand this. Does obesity impact incidence of oligomenorrhea? That is the first question. Obese women were twice as likely to have irregular menstrual complaints compared to normal women. So yes, obesity does impact oligomenorrhea. Now, impact of obesity on incidence of PCOS. One study found that girls with a high BMI in childhood had an increased risk of oligomenorrhea and a diagnosis of PCOS in young adults. So it did impact, and PCO was 5-fold more common among women, unselected premenopausal overweight obese women who were seeking weight loss. So in the general population, it was 5.5, but in these women, it was 28. So it is pointing towards obesity causing an increased incidence of PCOS. Impact of obesity on ovarian morphology. Now, do we find polycystic ovaries more in the obese women? Yes, nearly double, 61% versus 32% in normal weight women. They found ovarian morphology was impacted by obesity. Now the reverse. Can PCO predict obesity? In a study, it was found that the girls diagnosed with PCOS, 33% displayed obesity by the age of 24 years. So they were diagnosed as adolescents as PCOS, but by the time they reached the age of 24, 33% were obese. The other predictors of class 3 obesity, which they found, were low sex hormone binding globulin, oligomenorrhea, high childhood insulin levels, and increased free testosterone and a metabolic syndrome. Now, can PCOS predict obesity? But can PCOS cause obesity? Hypoandrogenemia, it has been seen, may contribute to the development of visceral adiposity in PCOS women. Now, they are all hypoandrogenic, and there is an increased truncal obesity in these patients, and it has been seen chronic exposure to high testosterone levels may modify fat distribution in these women. Obesity is a common finding in PCOS and aggravates many of its reproductive and metabolic features. The relationship between PCOS and obesity is complex, not well understood, and most likely involves interactions of not only just PCOS, but genetic and environmental factors. Hence, these studies illustrate that obesity and PCOS are correlative in their pathogenesis, and also suggests the detection of either obesity or PCOS in adolescents should be monitored closely for their long-term health risks. What comes first now? whether it is the egg or the chicken, this is the other side of the argument. However, association between adult obesity and PCOS is inconclusive. Now, these are studies which are showing that there is no association. Although obesity, particularly abdominal obesity, is a common trait in women with PCOS, it is not a part of the diagnostic criteria for PCOS. Why is that so? The prevalence of obesity varies among different populations and races, but the prevalence of PCOS is relatively uniform. This implies that obesity might not cause PCOS, or there could be a geographical and ethnic difference affecting the relationship between PCOS and obesity. What about metabolic syndrome in these young obese girls? Metabolic syndrome, sleep disturbances. Now, in the adults, we know that 3 out of 5 of these risk factors diagnose the adult metabolic syndrome. But definitions to diagnose the metabolic syndrome are controversial in the young age group, and many definitions have been proposed. This is due to the complex physiological and growth development during puberty, which causes a significant overlap between metabolic syndrome and features of normal growth. So in obese adolescents, hyperinsulinemia during puberty and unhealthy sleep behaviors increase the metabolic syndrome risk, and they should be screened for metabolic syndrome risk factors and sleep behaviors. So there should be a dietary lifestyle modification and a structured weight management program with a multidisciplinary approach where you meet every week to make sure that the adolescent is following it. Now, I was told to touch a little bit, just one slide on treatment, and because I'm sure the other lectures subsequently in the masterclass are going to deal with treatment. So I have touched only on the treatment of the obese adolescent pertaining to obesity. So just to know what all drugs can be given and what can't be. Orlistat is the only FDA approved medication for weight loss in 12 to 18, but that also now not being used much because of unpleasant side effects. And this is a 2020 article which was written by Woodard. Metformin has been used in children with signs of insulin resistance, but it usually does not have an impact on the weight, and it is not FDA approved for use for weight reduction. The combination of phentermine and topiramate has an FDA approval for weight loss in obese individuals 18 years and older. However, caution is taken because they cause congenital anomalies, so the young woman should not get pregnant. Again, GLP-1 agonists have demonstrated great success, and there was one randomized control trial of liraglutide where they did find that it is safe between 12 and 18 years. Interventions targeting the gut-liver axis to protect the intestinal mucosal lining, restoring intestinal barriers, and improving gut microbe through probiotics has been tried. Vitamin E also has helped to improve comorbidities of obesity. What about bariatric surgery in adolescents? Let's see. If performed earlier, they are better outcomes for weight reduction and in resolving obesity-related comorbidities later in adulthood. Indications for bariatric surgery in adolescents, they have to meet the following criteria: BMI greater than or equal to 35 and severe comorbidity, BMI greater than or equal to 40 with minor comorbidities, Tanner stage 4 or attainment of 95% of predicted adult stature based on bone age. That means the stature should have been reached, and a history of sustained effort to lose weight through changes in diet and physical activity, participated in a structured weight loss program for 6 months. So the adolescent has tried everything and it has not happened. Long-term data with adolescents is lacking, so we can't say about the safety, but depressive symptoms and quality of life did improve after surgery. Which surgery? So there is the Roux-en-Y gastric bypass, the laparoscopic sleeve gastrectomy, and the laparoscopic banding. So which one is safe for the adolescent? The RYGB and the LSG are safe for adolescents under 18, but gastric banding has not received a FDA approval. And this is a 2021 article which I'm quoting. Adolescents have lower surgical complication rate than adult counterparts. Hence, they say that better to do the bariatric surgery earlier than wait till adulthood, but you have to deal with the complications of nutritional imbalance. And 5-year data of gastric bypass in obese teens is promising. but the lifetime outcome is still unknown, and the psychosocial factors associated with post-surgery are challenging and uncertain. To conclude, I am concluding with the ACOG guidelines. Even if a definitive diagnosis of PCOS cannot be made during adolescence, treatment may be indicated. Treatment of PCOS in adolescents should address the symptoms and that the adolescent finds bothersome and leave the rest of them. Don't try and treat everything. Weight reduction can improve menstrual cycle regularity but does not have a significant effect on hirsutism. Metformin can be used for abnormal glucose tolerance, although it provides no advantage over lifestyle modification with regard to weight reduction or menstrual irregularity in adolescents. Combined hormonal contraceptives can regulate menstrual cycles and normalize serum androgens, thereby improving acne. They also provide protection against unintended pregnancy and decrease the risk of developing endometrial cancer. We all know that polycystic ovarian disease is characterized by ovulatory dysfunction, hyperandrogenemia, and frequently is present during adolescence. Because PCOS has a lifelong implication, including an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, endometrial carcinoma, it is very important a diagnosis of PCOS should be considered in any adolescent female with obesity accompanied by hirsutism or menstrual irregularity. So, this statement of ACOG answers what the talk is asking. So what they're saying is it's not that every adolescent who is obese or hirsute is a PCOS. But if you miss out PCOS, it has lifelong implications like metabolic syndrome. So every patient who is obese and hirsute must be treated, not for PCOS, but for their symptoms, and must be diagnosed and followed up. It is so very important. There is a great need for research into several issues regarding complexity of PCOS and their true negative late impact on women's health. The real challenge will be, after acquiring evidence-based knowledge regarding the late consequences, to adopt safe strategies in protecting women's health during her whole life. And protection has to start from adolescence. It is critical for public health and for optimum design of a long-term studies to stratify women with PCOS according to their metabolic risk. Treatment without prevention is simply unsustainable. And remember, prevention must start in adolescence. So when you see an adolescent who is oligomenoric or an adolescent who is obese, your antennas should be up to diagnose them early to prevent later implications of metabolic syndrome and other long-term complications like an endometrial carcinoma. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an enlightening talk. Now I would request Dr. Neela to conclude the talk.
Dr. Surveen, this was a wonderful talk, truly a masterpiece. And I think your vast experience of teaching, has really made this a very, very interesting talk. And each and every slide was wonderful. Congratulations and thank you so much for this lovely talk, because as it is, PCOS has been very, very difficult to sort of diagnose, especially at the adolescent age. And despite the guidelines of 2018, it remains very sort of, uncertain as to which patient should be treated which way. And your talk has really given us these crystal clear guidelines, to ideas to treat these patients. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me over. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am. Now we'd request Dr. Ritu Jain. She's an expert in our session to have.
Dr. Sunita.
Dr. Sarika, please unmute yourself.
Dr. Sunita, Dr. Sonu, and Dr. Anju, first of all, thanks for the opportunity given. And I pay my regards to Dr. Usha, who is my teacher, and she taught us a lot. And without fail, Surveen is always an excellent speaker, and her talk is so lucid. There is hardly anything left to comment. But then there are certain things which I would just like to highlight. Surveen has very well highlighted that it is the diagnosis of exclusion, and we have to rule out every cause which is the cause for hyperandrogenemia and hypoestrogenemia before we label a patient for PCOS. And very well, Surbin, you have highlighted the fact that even the patients who are at risk and the patients who are diagnosed as PCOS need a longitudinal follow-up. And there is something interesting I found in American Academy of Pediatrics 2020 journal. They have highlighted the importance of waist-hip ratio more than BMI for the obvious reasons, because the growth curve chart varies in these patients. And nowadays there is more stress on measuring the WHR, and more stress is coming on the testosterone and dihydrotestosterone ratio. Maybe in few years, this change comes up. And when we score hirsutism, there was an important finding that receding of the hairline is one of the very important complaint by the patients, which we often overlook. And it has not been included in the FG criteria. So maybe in the FG scoring that also comes up. So thank you, Dr. Surbin, for an excellent talk.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now I'll move the session. Our next chairpersons are Dr. Amita Pandey and Dr. Usha, Dr. Suman Mittal. Dr. Suman Mittal. Dr. Komal, please share the CV of Dr. Suman. Oh, okay. Suman Mittal,
Doctor,
ma'am.
please continue.
Suman Mittal, ma'am, are you there?
She has not joined.
Dr. Suman Mittal has not joined. Dr. Amita, Dr. Amita, ma'am.
Dr. Amita is here.
Dr. Sarika, continue. That's okay.
Oh, okay.
Continue with Dr. Amita.
Okay, ma'am. Dr. Amita Pandey, she is a professor at KGMU, Gynae Ops, and she is very dear to our hearts. She is a real beauty with brains and a very good orator. She is the Joint Secretary IF. I welcome Dr. Amita Pandey to chair this session. Amita, ma'am, please.
Dr. Amita, please unmute yourself. You're muted.
Amita, ma'am.
Amita is very much around. Amita ने शुरू में join कर लिया था. Where is she?
Yes, I can see her in the panelist as well.
Yeah, she's there, yes, but she's muted actually.
Right.
So,
if somebody can call Dr. Amita ma'am, na, maybe she's not at the computer.
Okay,
I think she's muted also. She's muted.
Thank you. Yeah.
Ma'am,
She is there, but she is muted.
Ma'am, she is there. She's saying her laptop has hanged, so she's just joining on phone.
Absolutely. Thank you.
But she's muted and her video is also off.
Her laptop has hanged, ma'am. So she's joining.
Okay.
yeah, she has joined.
She's here.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, ma'am.
So
Welcome,
sorry,
ma'am.
I'm so sorry. As there was some problem with my laptop, so I've joined with my cell phone.
Okay. Welcome, ma'am. We'll start the second session. Our second speaker is Dr. Smriti Mittal. Ma'am, kindly introduce the speaker and over to you, ma'am.
Yes, it's at the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Sunita for organizing this wonderful webinar. This whole concept of starting a masterclass on one particular topic and gradually addressing the various aspects of all of it is indeed wonderful. Introducing the speaker for this session, it's a privilege for me to introduce my colleague from my department, Dr. Smriti Agarwal.
Right.
And she is an additional professor in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, a very intelligent person, a very methodical person, who has had major achievements in the form of coming up with various guidelines for Ministry of Health and Family Welfare on gestational diabetes mellitus, tuberculosis, in infertility, and she has been a part of several expert group, and she's been on the administrative end as Joint Organizing Secretary of AICOG 2020, Joint Secretary, Lucknow Obs Gynae Society, and so many more activities. Besides that, it is my privilege to inform the audience that she is a very academically sound person who is very well versed with the changes in the various guidelines. So I would like to now invite Dr. Smriti to present her talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abita. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to be introduced by you. I hope my slides are visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Yes, doctor.
It is, thank you so much, Dr. Sunita Chandra, ma'am. It is a true privilege for me, and I'm so humbled to be amongst such IVF stalwarts from the Indian Fertility Society. And I am so proud to be one of the speakers of the masterclass of PCOS, which you have started. And it's an honor for me. Thank you so much. I must say this was again a very non-conventional topic, and it gave me a big impetus to learn and read about it. And I hope I would be able to do justice to it. So when we talk about adolescent PCOS, we have just heard Dr. My previous speaker when she was talking about adolescent PCOS, and we have just seen what are the challenges in the diagnosis. So I will very quickly recapitulate, and we will look into the management options, which are both non-medical as well as medical. So we have just seen that teenage girls PCOS is a big challenge. The reason is because most of the things which are diagnostic features of PCOS are very normal in adolescent girls. For example, acne, irregular menses, and anovulation. Even the Ferryman-Galloway score for hirsutism is not suitable for them, and pelvic ultrasounds are unreliable. But in our OPD, when an adolescent girl comes to us with irregular menstruation, as Dr. Surbeen also just now said, that we must have our antennas up and we must think about PCOS, especially the girls. Maybe the first 1 year after menarche, we may be lying low because HPO axis takes its time to mature. But after 1 year, up to 3 years, if the cycles are coming less than 21 days or more than 45 days, we must think of PCOS. If the cycles after 3 years are coming at intervals of less than 21 or more than 35 days, or less than 8 cycles per year, or any time after 1 year, if the cycles are coming more than 90 days, we must think of PCOS. Clinical hyperandrogenism, again, adolescent girls, they present with hirsutism and acne. And we do have modified Ferryman-Galloway score with a score of more than 4 to 6, but it is not very suitable. And acne, we do not have a very objective way of assessing it and saying whether it is mild, moderate, or severe. Now, one thing which I want to tell you about this biochemical hyperandrogenism is a lot of times we get reports of testosterone values. It is very important that when we look at these reports, we see how this testosterone level has been done. If it has been done by liquid chromatography or mass spectrophotometry, then these values are reliable and they are accurate. Most of the times labs, they do it by an ELISA method or a radiometric method, and these testosterone levels are not at all sensitive and they are not accurate. Moreover, in adolescent girls, testosterone may just rise like that in anovulatory cycles, and it may not truly predict to actually adult hyperandrogenism, so we may have to ignore it. Sonography, we have just heard ma'am say, but sonography should not be used in young girls. That is because even ESHRE guidelines in 2018 said that a girl has to have a gynecological age of at least 8 years. That means she should be at least 8 years post-menarche, and then only we should say whether she has polycystic ovaries or not on ultrasound, because there is a very, very high incidence of multifollicular ovaries at this stage, and we may only be erroneously diagnosing these girls. So PCOS, any girl who complains of hirsutism, menstrual irregularity, or obesity. Obesity is definitely not a criteria, but if we have a combination of these three, we must have our antennas up. Girls with evidence of PCOS within 1 to 2 years after menarche, and where we are not able to really pinpoint a diagnosis, we must put in our prescription paper that these girls are at risk for PCOS. And as my previous speaker also said, that they should be longitudinally followed up and treated symptomatically. It does not matter whether we make a diagnosis or not, but we have to start treating her. So we know that there is increased risk, the girls who are at risk right at the beginning, they should be reassessed at or before the full reproductive maturity, which is 8 years post-menarche. And only at that time we would be able to say what exactly is happening. We have just heard her, I'm not going to be repeating this, that PCOS is completely a diagnosis of exclusion. So now we come to the management strategies. We have non-medical, of course, where lifestyle modification, dietary intervention, doing exercises, topical treatment, and psychosocial counseling forms are very, very important and a mainstay of non-medical management of PCOS. Medical, of course, we have a multitude of drugs, and I'm sure that in the next series of masterclass, we will be talking about these medical and surgical methods of managing these girls. Now let's come to lifestyle modification. Even when we were postgraduates or even in our busy OPDs, sometimes we just write in our prescription papers, lifestyle modification. And that is all. And we tell them, okay, try losing weight. But very little time we actually go into the detail, into exactly how it has to be done and what is to be done. We must remember that elevated BMI is one of the biggest risk factors. And we've just seen that at least 80% of these adolescent girls who turn out to be PCOS are actually overweight or obese. And lifestyle modification, therefore, forms the first therapeutic intervention. How can we do it? We can do it by reducing the calorie intake, by encouraging healthy eating, and increasing the physical activity and exercise. It is not just that these things have to be done. It is there is an evidence to say that a combination of weight loss and increased exercises, it results in decrease of the testosterone levels, increases the serum hormone binding globulin, and also normalizes the menstrual cycles. Literature says that when there is a reduction in BMI of 0.25, or if a girl is exercising for at least 30 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous, there is a definite improvement in the cardiovascular risk factors, lowers the blood pressure, manages the impaired glucose tolerance and dyslipidemia in PCOS, which can later on, if not treated, turn out to be a bad metabolic syndrome. Moreover, apart from these biochemical parameters, there is definitely a change in her clinical profile as well, because if there is a lifestyle modification, there would be lower level of hirsutism, hyperandrogenism, waist circumference, and insulin resistance too. So now what exactly is happening in these adolescent girls with PCOS? There are definite diet abnormalities in these girls. There is a craving for carbohydrates and sweets. Now, sometimes we know that children, if they go on for a long interval without meal, they remain fine. But especially the girls who have PCOS, they will start experiencing symptoms of hypoglycemia in the form of dizziness, fatigue, irritability, or headaches. Not just this, these girls will also develop postprandial somnolence and exhaustion because of reactive hypoglycemia. And that is, if they have a very starchy food or sugary loaded food, they will develop reactive hypoglycemia because there will be a pancreatic outpouring of insulin. As it is, these girls have high insulin levels, and moreover, delayed onset of insulin will lead to reactive hypoglycemia, and thereby again craving for sweets. So this vicious cycle will just go on and on. So then how do we achieve weight loss? To achieve weight loss, it is important that there has to be an energy deficit of 30%. That is approximately a negative balance of 500 to 750 kilocalories per day. A girl should be prescribed around 1,200 to 1,500 kilocalories in the entire day. And it is important that as per whatever she has been taking, we need to customize the dietary plan. So then how do we modify this diet? It has to be completely calorie appropriate, depending upon her BMR, depending upon what work she is doing, and of course her weight. We must suggest to her that she must have small and frequent meals, because this is going to reduce her food cravings. The hungrier she gets, more sweet cravings she will have, and more sweets she will start having, and binges as well. So she must reduce the sugar load, and she must include complex carbohydrates in a meal. because we know that complex carbohydrates, they break down slowly. So there are no peaks of glucose levels post meals. It must provide steady flex of energy, not like postprandial peaks and then reactive hypoglycemia. And of course, if she is eating regularly, then it will prevent low blood sugar levels. So ideal would be to go ahead with 3 meals and 3 snacks for these girls. So for these adolescent kids, there are simple tips and tricks to follow. It's important that whatever sugary snacks and drinks they are having, they must be substituted for the drinks which are low in sugar. We must, at the mealtime, they must have regular and proper meal. Check on their snacks so that they do not get addicted to having snacks in the evening. Medium-sized meals should be encouraged. They should not have too small or too big meals, because this will again lead to hypoglycemia either by itself or by reactive hypoglycemia. Children must have at least 5 portions of fruits and vegetables, and we know how difficult it is being mothers ourselves. We must cut back on fat, and at least 60 minutes of activity a day will help to ensure that they maintain a healthy lifestyle. And we should stop sedentary lifestyle and spending too much time sitting down, playing video games and online games. So when we come to carbohydrate, which is the mainstay of the meals which we have, dietary carbohydrates should be taken in the form of fruits, vegetables, whole grains and legumes. And we must avoid the refined carbohydrates in the form of maida and other refined flours. The reason is, if the carbohydrate is refined, it will break down easily. And if it breaks down easily, it will elevate the blood sugar levels very rapidly. Now, coming to the glycemic index, we know that glucose has a glycemic index of 100, and we compare the rest of the foods to glucose. Now, the foods which have high glycemic index, usually have between 70 to 100, are the ones like white bread or cornflakes, potatoes, honeys, and soft drinks. And we must try and eat them as minimum as possible. Medium GI foods are like watermelon and juices, and low GI foods are like lentils, the dals which we have, milk, peaches, and sweet potato. There is evidence to show that there are changes in insulin sensitivity and clinical outcome in women of PCOS when they were given 2 types of diets, either conventional diet or low GI diet. And low GI diet, definitely these women had better insulin sensitivity, and we were able to manage their menstrual cycle irregularity also in a better manner. But we also must remember that all the meals cannot have just low GI foods. The reason is, low GI foods, it is not necessary would be nutritious. So sometimes we have to include high GI foods, but we must remember that these high GI foods are kept in very, very moderate amounts, so that the rise in the blood sugar levels is not very quick and rapid. Now let's come to the lipids. 2/3 of the adolescent girls have lipid abnormalities when their lipid profiles are done. And it is very important that when we see obese girls who have hyperandrogenemia, we must get their fasting lipid profile done. They have elevated levels of LDL and triglycerides and low levels of HDL. And there is also release of free fatty acids into the circulation, and thereby increase VLDL levels. So what should we do? We know that there are fats which are used in our kitchen, be it in the form of butter, oil, or dairy products, and meats and processed food. We must try and see that hydrogenated and trans fats, we should not use them. And what are these hydrogenated trans fats? Here, basically the vegetable oil, you put hydrogen inside in them, and these liquid oils are turned into semi-solids. So what is available in the market is most of the times trans fats. So have a look at that and avoid that as much as possible, because this leads to increase in the bad cholesterol levels. Try grilling the vegetables and not frying them. And instead of using dressings and salads, try and using olive oil and vinegar, because these are going to have less amount of fats and more of unsaturated fatty acids and essential fatty acids, which are healthy as well. Now, we keep saying that they should have fruits, at least 5 servings of fruits and vegetables. But fruits, it's not recommended that fruits should be eaten just like that. We must add little bit amount of fat and protein also in the fruits in the form of low-fat yogurt and low-fat cheese, and all nuts as well. Because what actually happens is, if you have just fruits alone, they will increase your blood sugar levels, and even the satiety will not be there. So if you add nuts or if you add low-fat yogurt or cheese in them, there will be better satiety, and it will also stabilize the blood sugar levels in the postprandial period. And definitely not get fooled by 100% juice or the real juices, because it is only 100% sugar, we know that. And we must always encourage our children to have whole fruits instead of juices. Just saying have 5 servings of vegetables again is not going to work out, because there are certain vegetables which are starchy, like corn, potatoes, and peas. And they will definitely increase the blood sugar levels rapidly. So non-starchy vegetables are low in calories. And for example, spinach, bean, at least 3 servings of them should be encouraged. Now, fiber, again, a very, very important part of meal for our children, for adolescent girls, which is present in the form of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, and whole grains. What actually fiber does is it produces a feeling of fullness, and it delays the gastric emptying, so the girls don't feel hungry very soon. It also lowers the cholesterol, slows the digestion, and slows the absorption rate of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are broken down also in a slower fashion, and there would be a gradual rise in blood sugar levels. And that is how it reduces the reactive hypoglycemia and food cravings. If the stomach feels full, the blood sugar levels are fine, she is not going to feel hungry very soon. At least 25 to 30 grams of fiber should be taken daily in the form of whole wheat flour, etc. Now that was all about the diet. Now when we talk about weight reduction goals, these goals have to be achievable. We should not get carried away by the pictures we see in the magazines or the televisions or in the internet where there is a rapid reduction in the weight, because the goals have to be smart, that is measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Then only we can achieve them. And we must aim only at 5 to 10% weight loss. If a girl is 90 kgs, don't aim that within 6 months she's going to become 50 kgs or 60 kgs. Even if she reduces 6 to 8 kgs in 6 months, we should be happy about it. Because it is not just reducing goal, it is also maintaining that the reduced weight, which is very, very important. And these realistic goals can actually begin with just 10-minute bouts of exercises. And slowly we can gradually increase it to 5 to 10%. We can keep increasing weekly or fortnightly. And nowadays, thankfully, thanks to the technology, we have a lot of fitness tracking devices which can help us self-monitor. Because we know that if weight loss program is self-directed, usually it's a failure. So either if there is an in-support person or if there is a tracking device, then we would be more, we would stick to our weight management issues and weight reduction goals. Now, if you look at the exercise regimes, there is a difference in the exercise regimes which are recommended for adults, and there is a difference in adolescents. In adults, we say that they should do at least 150 minutes per week. For example, if she's able to exercise for 5 days in a week, she will have to exercise for at least 30 minutes per day. Or if she's doing vigorous exercises, it has to be 75 minutes per week. Or she needs to do muscle strengthening exercises. But for adolescent girls, it has to be 60 minutes per day. So that means it's going to be more than the adults. Again, as I said, it is very difficult to motivate and make them start doing 30 minutes right from day one. So we should begin with 10-minute bout. Maybe, she can take 1,000 steps after each meal, or, you can, whenever she has time, she can do 10 minutes of exercise. So that should be able to take it up. Now, if you look at what is severe intensity, because when we talk of severe intensity or moderate intensity is when we walk fast, which is race walking, or when we are going uphill, or aerobic dancing, or in the form of martial arts or running. And the moderate intensity ones are water aerobics, or brisk walking, ballroom dancing, or any kind of sports if she can play. Even if she plays for a badminton or a tennis, maybe for an hour or a day, that should be enough to help her achieve her goal. Now that was about diet and exercises. Now acne and hirsutism, as we know, it's a big problem for these adolescent girls, and we do have certain non-medical therapies available for them. Now for hirsutism, we have temporary and permanent methods, laser hair removal and electrolysis. These are the permanent methods of hair removal, which can be used for these girls, and temporary methods are bleaching, using some chemical methods, or plucking or waxing. But laser, of course, is the most effective, and laser therapies are now available in the market very frequently. And most of the adolescent girls can go for it, and they're completely safe as well. Apart from these, there are certain creams available in the form of eflornithine hydrochloride, which is recommended along with laser therapy for girls who have hirsutism. And it works by inhibiting the ornithine decarboxylase activity. It can be applied twice daily, and minimum 4 to 6 weeks use has to be there for us to see the effects. When it is used just alone, patients can expect a 20 to 25% improvement. And this drug is pretty safe and has very little systemic absorption. But the problem is it has to be used indefinitely to prevent regrowth. So that is why these drugs, this medication, this ointment is not used alone by itself. Usually we couple it with the laser or photoepilation so that the effect is better. We know for the acne, there are topical retinoic acids and antibiotics available. Now let's come to a psychosexual part. Most of these adolescent girls, we know they suffer from psychosocial comorbidity. And major depression is found in at least 33% of these adolescent girls. Anxiety in another 14% of them, and binge eating in another 7% of them. So when these adolescent girls, they come to us, a psychological screening should be a part of the diagnostic workup, because otherwise they suffer from such bad thoughts and they have this negative body image about themselves, which can be detrimental to their personality. Usually it is seen that these girls, they have very little control over their menstrual irregularities because they can't predict when their periods will happen. And on top of that, a society problems, which is a threat of infertility. This is reported as the most stressful and least controllable aspects of PCOS. And these adolescent girls, they start worrying about it right from the beginning. So we as healthcare professionals, we should be very well aware of it. And we should try and look for these signs of depression and anxiety and talk to them and help them, recover from this and have a better positive image of themselves. A stepped approach should be followed. And these adolescent girls are also at high risk of eating disorders, sexual dysfunctions, and sometimes even autism is found in them. So psychological counseling should be a very, very integral part of managing these adolescent girls. Now, of course, we will be having many more, webinars on this pharmacological management, so I'm not going to be touching on them. So the take-home message of this session was that it's a complex endocrine phenomena, we know. And we also know that this is assuming pandemic proportions in adolescents. Very soon, after 5 to 10 years, we will have to run our own PCOS clinics, because the number of girls who are going to be coming just with PCOS is going to be very, very high. And hopefully, by all these things, we would be able to get a diagnosis right, because we know that in adolescent girls, it's very difficult to be, very sure, categorically right that this, yes, she has PCOS or she may develop PCOS. If she's obese, weight control is very, very important and will go a long way in taking care of her metabolic problems. There should be a tailored approach. And as I said, self-directed goals do not work very long. There has to be an in-support person or a tracking device so that they know exactly what is happening. And non-medical therapy would also include the hair removal techniques and psychological support. So holistic approaches are required. Pharmacological therapy by itself may not be enough, and we need to do this education, lifestyle, and cosmetic therapy and counseling to all these girls, and only then we will be able to achieve our goals. These were some very interesting quotes which I found on internet, which I wanted to share. It just shows how frustrating it is to have PCOS. PCOS means I'm feeling tired all day, no matter how much I sleep. It means I have to deal with hormonal mood swings. It means I'm trying everything I know to lose weight, but the weight does not shift an inch. And also that doctors don't really understand PCOS, and it is up to yourself to educate and become empowered and get rid of this problem. And of course, PCOS is a hidden pandemic, which we have been talking about. And we all have to be very alert and start treating them early so that we are able to control their metabolic problems right from the start. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Smriti, for such a lucid and clear talk. It was an excellent presentation. And now I would request Dr. Ritu to conclude the talk and give her expert comments. Dr. Ritu Jain,
Smriti,
please.
for a wonderful presentation. And in fact, it is very true that first the lifestyle modification is the main measure to control the disease right from the beginning. All the major societies all over the world have emphasized that it is the lifestyle modification, and in OPD we spend very less time. In fact, in our prescription, we have to have all these things written for the patient apart from customizing. So it is very, very important to have exercise under a trainer, because otherwise we understand that and with the trainer, they are more motivated. Sometimes these patients are so low with respect to their body image that they are not able to take up. And the minute they feel tired, they will give up. So we have to have some trained persons who can get them exercise done, push them up, and give their diet plan also. And other thing is, nowadays we are having so many millets and multigrain things excluding gluten, which helps in healing them better, because we know it is the inflammatory response of the adipose tissue where gluten itself is considered as inflammatory. So when we go for diets for these patients, we know that DASH and the Mediterranean diet is the diet which is recommended, as you rightly said, and it has to be focused on the whole grain. And regarding exercise, I would like to add that whatever the effect comes from the exercise, it is only lasting for 24 to 48 hours. So consistency is very, very important. And it is the last bout of activity which brings the maximum response. And very brightly, Dr. Smriti has highlighted the psychosocial impact. We have to talk to these girls at length in some special time, so that we can discuss their problems regarding body image. And apart from that, because these patients are undergoing through the time when they want their best of image, and they are putting on weight, and the social impact or the peer pressure makes them stay indoors, we have to have help of our skin derma specialist involvement also, especially regarding the severe acne. Of course, along with all the treatment, it is very important that we should have their consultation with them also. And one last comment I would like to say is, it is very important to call them for follow-up and encourage after 2-3 months, take a pic of theirs and take the measurements of theirs, so that they are more encouraged, because weight loss will take a long to come up. It is like within 3 months, they will simply have inch loss. And after 3 to 6 months, something will move. So we can simply revise their diet and encourage them more. Thank you so much, Dr. Smriti, for bringing the points. And in routine OPD, it is not really possible to write all these things. It's better that we write a sort of diet for them and give it to them and reassess or involve their dietitian if it is a severe PCOS, especially with obese. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Superman. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for such an enlightening talk. And now there's a question in the chat box, ma'am. I would like Dr. Anju Mathur to take the question. The question is there any role of Asia Pacific criteria for BMI in the PCO patients in our country, or do we prefer the WHO criteria in Asia Pacific region also? Because the changes of metabolic syndrome begin at a lower BMI in Asian than in Western women. Dr. Anju, ma'am.
Thank you for that question, Dr. Sarika. I think it was Dr. Bharati who has asked this question.
Yes,
I just wanted to clear this, that both the criteria are given by WHO only, but WHO has given different criteria for Asia Pacific and for the other European countries. So the criteria is this, that for our Asian countries, the BMI, the normal BMI considered is 23, and for European and for some other countries, they have put it as 25. So in India, more than 23, the complications of diabetes, obesity, and cardiovascular diseases are seen more. So that is why the criteria has been changed to 23 in the last, I think, 3-4 years. I don't know the exact year. So that is how we follow the WHO criteria for the Asian countries, that is 23 TMI. And that was a very nice thing by Dr. Bittu to say that waist-hip ratio is a better predictor for health in PCOS, not exactly the BMI. And yes, we have to, get more gold medals and put all these girls into the field so that they do more activities and less of computers and less of sitting down. Then only we can actually change the lifestyle that we are living is very, very difficult to change. So to initiate the adolescence, yes, it is difficult. The parents have to do it, the teachers have to do it, the peer group has to do it. Any other question? I think we have another question also, Sarika.
Ma'am, this is for sharing the lecture series, ma'am.
Okay.
One more question. Can we give aldactone or for hirsutism in adolescent? I think Dr. Smriti can answer. Can we give aldactone for hirsutism in adolescent?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, when we talk of medical management for hirsutism, first therapy which we give is combined oral contraceptive pills. And if after 3 to 6 months we don't find any effect, then of course anti-androgens and aldactone can be given, apart from the laser therapy and the other topical treatments which we have discussed. Yes, ma'am, they can be given.
So we will be coming up with the medical treatment, metformin, inositols, hormonal therapy, everything in our coming episodes of this series of webinars. We will be definitely coming on this. Please stay with us. Please keep watching our webinars because this will be on every second Thursday of the month. Time will be 5 to 7, maybe little up or down, but we will be coming up with this series on every second Thursday of the month. Yeah, Dr. Sarika.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to say one thing, considering that it is coming in pandemic proportion, WHO has launched a 6 points activity program to decrease this obesity pandemic from 2018 to 2030, and it is available on net. So exercise and diet all is available.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now we'll be moving to our next session. That is the highlight of this series, our quiz. Our quiz master is Dr. Manjusha. Komal, please.
Exciting part of the session.
Dr. Manjusha is a senior gynecologist at Sahara Hospital, Lucknow. She has a great experience in her field and she's very talented doctor. And without wasting much time, I'll hand over the screen to Dr. Manjusha to conduct her session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarika, for the kind words. And before I begin, let me thank Dr. Smriti, the entire IFS team, the IFS 3 chapters, and the trade partners who have provided us this lovely platform, and the audience who have joined us. And also, I will really thank Dr. Sureen Human and Dr. Smriti Agarwal for the wonderful presentations which they delivered. The message was just too good, very comprehensive and very crisp, and that would make the entire quiz more of a contest because you have given so many answers. Somebody who were very keenly looking at your slides would be able to come across with the answers. So let me start sharing my screen.
Dr. Sunita, you have to announce that there is a prize for the winners, right?
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Yeah, I'm coming to that.
No problem, Dr. Anju, you announce, you are part of it. This prize, yes, there are prizes actually.
Yes.
So the quiz is on living with PCOS and the management dilemmas in adolescence. So what have we learned? We have some rules. The quiz is open to all, irrespective of age, designation, and years of post-graduation. So I request everybody to participate, and we shall be following the policy of fastest finger first, like you have in KBC. And the first person who can post the correct answer in the chat box is recorded as the one eligible to win the prize for that question. I request Professor Amrita Pandey to please help pinpoint the winner. The participant with highest number of eligible answers, that is, you punch in the correct answer fastest. The participant with the highest number of eligible answers wins. And Dr. Sunita has arranged a fabulous prize for the winner. I think there are two of them, or is one prize? Can't hear you. Three prizes. Wow. So everybody must participate. Okay. So now there are 4 rounds of 3 questions each, and the answers would be explained after each round. There are some questions with a funny emoticon, although I expect you guys to answer, but they're not competitive. So happy quizzing. So the first question is, what is the single most important investigation to exclude non-classical congenital adrenal hyperplasia in a girl with suspected adolescent PCOS? I can't see the chat box while sharing this.
See the chat box. Everybody can see the chat box.
Okay, while I'm sharing my screen, I'm not able to see. Okay. So do we have some answers already?
Yes, we have. Fatafat.
Their answer.
Okay.
Multiple.
Wow.
It is going to be difficult for Amita to really point out. Yes, next question, please.
Yeah. So the second question, I've kept it as a multiple choice question. When in an adolescent with hypomenorrhea is biochemical androgen assessment indicated? When would you get the serum androgen levels done in a lady who comes to us with hypomenorrhea? Do we do it for all post-pubertal girls who come to us with delayed cycles? Do we do it only for the girls? Do we do it for girls with delayed cycles with obesity? Do we recommend this test for girls with delayed cycles, obesity, and mild hirsutism? Or do we do it only for the post-pubertal hypomenorrheic girls who come to us with severe or early onset, rapidly progressive hirsutism?
Manjusha, answers are already there.
Okay. Okay, so I guess I can move on to the next question. Can I?
Yes,
Yes,
answers
ma'am.
are already there.
Okay. So the third question. What is the most practical way of documenting the effect of treatment on facial hirsutes? Is it the serum androgen levels? Is it the frequency of needing hair removing techniques?
Answer aa gaya.
Is it the Feynman-Galvez scoring, or is it a series of selfies?
Answer is already there.
Oh, thank you so much. So okay. Okay. So, Dr. Amita, are you noting down the winners?
Yes, trying to keep pace.
Difficult.
So
Yes.
the first and the second you should be noting down only.
Doctor, I can help you with this, Dr. Amita.
डॉक्टर सारिका प्लीज
सबसे पहले इसने दिया है, मैं बताती हूँ.
हाँ सबसे पहले
Okay.
That
Now
list
before
is
I
there
come
in
to
the
the
chat box.
answers, although the answers are obvious, before I come to the answers, yes. So people of my age have seen this image in their Shaw's gynecology textbooks. I wonder if in this internet era people have seen this image. Amita, you must have seen this in our Shaw's. So what is the cause of hirsutism in this breastfeeding mother? The bearded person is actually a lady. She's breastfeeding her child. So what is the cause of hirsutism which was mentioned in our textbooks of those times? I guess only people my age can be answering this. No.
Yeah.
Now before we
answered. This is not PCOS. This is not PCOS.
This is not PCOS. This is not PCOS. No.
This
I
is
mean, this is such a funny filler. You know, I really love this image. I was really perturbed when I saw it the first time, and I thought I must share it with everybody here.
This is danazol, na?
This is
Danazol.
yes, yes, absolutely. and it was this very image which was used to tell us the side effect profile of danazol was not acceptable to women, and that is why danazol fell into disrepute for teaching treating endometriosis. This is how we were taught this way back in 1990s. Okay, now coming to the solutions. The investigation to exclude non-classical CAH of course is hydroxyprogesterone, and levels above 200 mandate further evaluation. The biochemical evaluation of androgens is only indicated in girls who come to us with early onset, rapidly progressive or severe hirsutism. It is not indicated for any and every young girl who comes to us with hypomenorrhea. And the most practical way is the frequency of needing a hair removal method. Earlier we thought it could be selfies, but then none of the girls are going to roam about with a hairy face. So even selfies, a series of selfies also is not a very valid option. Okay. So I move further to the next round. So before the next round, yes, I have two more things to mention. The testosterone levels above 200 suggest ovarian tumors, and disulfide levels above 700 suggest adrenal tumors. So all of us know that. Okay. Now, moving on to the second round, the question 4 is, in a patient of suspected adolescent PCOS, when can PCO morphology on an ultrasound scan be used as a diagnostic criteria? So both my speakers have already talked this. When is PCO morphology already criteria for diagnosis of adolescent PCOS? Always? Only in girls above 16? Is it after 3 years of menarche, or is it after 8 years of menarche?
Manjusha, answers are already there. You can move ahead.
Thank you. Okay.
Many answers.
Okay. I've kept the quiz very easy. Next time it should be more difficult.
Keep it easy.
Okay. So, what is the...
I would request all the people who are answering the quiz to put the question number and then write the answer.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Amita, for that very important gift which I had forgotten to mention. Please take care of this, otherwise we will not be able to track. Okay, yes. Question 5 is, what is the commonest cause of irregular menses, mild facial hirsutis, and overweight in early teenage girls? Is it physiological hyperandrogenism of puberty? Is it PCOS? Is it delayed onset congenital adrenal hyperplasia? Or is it androgen secreting tumors? Any answers are coming? I can't see.
Answers have already.
Yes. They are already
The answers.
Can I move further?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. How much calorie deficit would result in a 1 kg weight loss in women? 1 kg total weight loss, and how much total calorie deficit is needed to be equal to a 1 kg weight loss? Is it 750 calories a day? Is it 7,500 calories? Is it 7,500 calories per day? Or is it something which has not been described?
Answers are there.
Oh, thank you. Do we wait for some more, or do we move ahead?
Yes, ma'am, move ahead. There are many answers.
Now comes the yes.
Yes.
Who is she? And can she be labeled as PCOS? This is not a competitive answer, although I would request you to put in the answers, but this does not fit into competition. There's no question number there.
इसका भी जवाब आ गया. Bharti, no.
She is. She looks like PCOS to me, with a double chin and lots of acne must be there behind the cake of makeup which she's wearing, and she definitely looks as if she has a lot of android obesity. So I think she definitely looks like PCOS to me. Okay, so the answers are very obvious. PCO morphology is used as a diagnostic criteria only after 8 years of menarche. Dr. Smriti has already told us that 30 to 40% of adolescents have multifollicular ovaries, which does not imply PCOS. Physiological hyperandrogenism of puberty is the answer to the commonest cause, and the DD has already been talked already by Dr. Subnin as well as Dr. Smriti. PCOS, CAH, androgen secreting tumors, hypothyroidism, Cushing's, and hyperthyroidism. And the calorie deficit, which causes 1 kg weight loss, is 7,500 calories. Okay. Now, this answer also has already appeared in the talks. Name 2 permanent methods to get rid of facial hair. Please type in the correct answer. There is no ABC here, and also put in your name there. The question number there.
आ गया जवाब.
Yes, ma'am. Answers are coming.
Yeah, आ गया.
So can I move further?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I think this has not been covered in the talks. Name an oral non-hormonal drug which is used for severe acne treatment, which is also known to be teratogenic.
Yes.
Or is it decaloinositol?
Yes, you can move forward. आ गए जवाब बहुत सारे.
Right. We have already had a lot of discussion on this today. What is the criteria used for objective diagnosis of android obesity? Is it a waist circumference more than 35 inches? Is it a waist hip ratio of more than 0.85? Is it both of these or is it none of these?
The answers have come.
Okay. Now, the next funny thing is really, interesting. Yes. What is it? Is it a Ghode ki mala or is it a accessory or what is it? I think the person who correctly answers it deserves a special chocolate from us. It is not a fashion accessory. We gynecologists don't use it, but I can see Amita nodding. We used to use it in genetics.
Yeah.
Do we have any answers for this?
Yes.
Yeah, there are answers.
Wow. Okay. Now, coming to the competitive questions answers. The answers are very obvious. The 2 permanent methods to get rid of facial hair are electrolysis and laser. One thing interesting I learned while preparing was that melanin in the hair follicles absorbs a specific wavelength, and that causes thermolysis of the specific follicle. This is something interesting I didn't know earlier. Iso-T-retinoin is the non-hormonal agent which is used for treatment of severe acne. But since it is a teratogenic agent, women are counseled to use reliable contraception while on isotretinoin. And the criteria for android obesity, both of these are criteria. The waist circumference is the criteria according to AHA, and the waist hip ratio of more than 0.85 is the criteria given by WHO. So any of these, if the woman has, we can easily label her as android obesity. Okay. And this is something I like. The endocrinologists are very fond of calculating the mid-parental height. How is it calculated? Is it the mean height of both the parents? Is it the mean height of parents at the age of 20 years? Is it mean height of parents minus 6.5? Is it mean height of parents minus 2.5 centimeters? Sarita, do we have any answers to this?
Ma'am, the answers have come. And the best part is, ma'am, this question recently I read it in my daughter's book. Like she's in class 10th and it is in her book where I read this.
We're going to have real precocious kids, I mean, intellectually, not gynecologically. Okay. Yes. This is again a very simple question. What is the criteria for diagnosis of lean PCOS? Is it BMI more than equal to 25? Is it BMI less than equal to 25? Is it body weight below 50th centile for age? And height, is it body weight below 3rd centile for age and height?
And the answers have come.
Okay. So, here comes the last. I'm sure इसका जवाब नहीं आ पाएगा. I'm sure. How is, I should not have given the MCQ options, otherwise अब तो आसान हो गया. How is splenomegaly objectively diagnosed? Is it a cross width more than 8 millimeters? Is it a lengthwise width more than 5 to 6 millimeters? Is it the length of the hood, or is it all of these?
इसके भी जवाब आ गए फटाफट.
Wow, wow. So this brings me to the close of my questions, which I lined up for today. Okay. The mid-parental height is calculated as the mean height of parents minus 6.5 centimeters for girls. For boys, it becomes mean height plus 6.5 centimeters. PCOS, thin PCOS is a girl who has PCOS with BMI below 25. And as for splenomegaly, all these 3 are criteria for diagnosis of splenomegaly. And I really like this flower. This is almost the shape of a female external genitalia. And the name also is very interesting. The biological name is Clitoria ternatia, commonly called as the butterfly pea plant, which is native to Central Africa. I mean, interesting find. Thank you so much for being there for the quiz, and thank you so much for participating. Thank you, Dr. Smita. Thank you, Dr. Amita. Thank you, Dr. Sarika. Thank you, all the chairs and the experts. Thank you to the participants. Now, can we have Dr. Amita make the calculations, and Dr. Smita, can you tell us something in the meanwhile?
Thank you, Dr. Manjusha. We all enjoyed the quiz till we wait for the results.
I have it here. So the first question was correctly answered by Samriddhi Bhargav. The second question was first answered by Vaishali Jain. The third one by Dr. Seema. Fourth one by Dr. Sakshi. Fifth by Dr. Anjali Somani. Sixth by Dr. Pooja. Seventh again by Dr. Pooja. Eighth by Dr. Smita Dubey. Ninth by Dr. Fatima. 10th by Vaishali Jain. 11th by Smriti Soni. 12th by Dr. Sakshi. And the orchidometer thing was answered correctly by Neelam first, Dr. Neelam. So I think we have to give a big round of applause to everybody. Very well tried, and the way the questions were answered is actually amazing, Manjuta. I was not actually prepared for that. The way the answers came, just cut. I
mean, the question wasn't even there and the answer was there. The question wasn't even there and answer was there. It was amazing to see actually on the chat box, the answer is coming so fast.
So we have Dr.
Amazing session, amazing.
Dr. Vaishali with 2 correct answers.
हाँ, कौन है? एक बार फिर से कोमल, please note it down.
Dr. Pooja had 2 fastest fingers and Dr. Vaishali Jain had 2 fastest fingers.
तो 2 ठीक है. और इसके फिर एक और विनर बता दो, तीसरा.
Yes, he has many with the right answer.
तो 2 हो गए, पूजा और एक डॉक्टर वैशाली. एक विनर और बता दो तो तीनों को फिर प्राइज दिलवाएंगे, घर पे पहुंचेंगे प्राइजेस.
I think for the first question we can give Dr. Samriddhi Bhargav.
Yeah, she pointed out very fast, immediately. ठीक है.
She has answered many questions correctly.
Sarika?
Doctor, I have noted.
Okay.
I have noted.
So I think it was wonderful session. The talk given by Dr. Sudin was again it's an eye opener, and Dr. Smriti, non-medical treatment for adolescent PCOS was wonderful. And actually, she stressed out very nicely, and the message to the audience gave to the audience was very good, that you have to counsel and you have to give some time to them what to eat. Only lifestyle modification लिखने से काम नहीं चलेगा. We have to little bit more expressive about it, that what to do, what not to do. This is again very, very important. So both the lectures were very, very nice. Our chairpersons did a wonderful job. We missed Dr. Suman Mittal. I don't know what happened, but maybe it's okay.
Dr. Suman had some tragedy in the family. So
Okay. And the most important person, and my sincere thanks to Dr. Sudha Prasad, who gave her time from OT. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again. I know you are not there, but thanks is coming from my heart for this wonderful thing that you had given time from your busy schedule from the operation theater, as we could all see. Thank you for joining Dr. Anju, Dr. Sonu, who are with us for this whole webinar series. Dr. Amita Pandey and Dr. Manjusha are always there with me for any endeavor. Dr. Smriti, I should not say, but her talks are always wonderful. And Dr. Surbeen, I mean, it's very clear that she has prepared the topic so well. It was really very nicely covered. And thank you, Dr. Sarika, for conducting the session so well. And Dr. Manjusha for creating such happiness and, I mean, the noise on the session. And thank you, MQ. Thank you, Komal. Thank you, Dr. Amit, for giving us this platform where we could really connect each other. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
We'll meet
Thank
again
you so much.
Thursday of next month.
Definitely.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a wonderful learning exercise.
It was really wonderful.
So it was all success, Dr. Sunita, I believe. So
Yeah.
till the last point of the webinar, we have 150 people stick to the session.
Yes.
And the way answers were flowing in, that was fantastic. Even I was keeping a count of it. And Dr. Amita very well said, you have actually monitored all the, I believe, winners very correctly, very correctly. So all aligned with you, between you and me. Yeah, thank you so much.
Can we conclude?
thank you so much.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice
Bye,
evening.
bye.
Thank you,
See
ma'am.
you all.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bye. Thank you so much. Dr. Sarika is now here.
Yeah,
Yes,
ma'am,
joined
sorry,
back.
my net got stuck in between.
Sarika, thank you so much for conducting the session so well. You are our bright star.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity. Ma'am, net अचानक से चला गया अभी last में.
I was there, don't worry.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Enjoyed thoroughly.
Yes, thoroughly enjoyed.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'll just end the webinar. Thank you.